Hi, yeah, so I'm Rosie Bolton. This is Arianne Panton. We are from the Leather Conservation Centre. So I do think that probably a lot of you know possibly even more about the organisation than we do. But we'll give a brief overview anyway for those that don't. So the LCC is a National Heritage Conservation Charity, which was established in 1978 by John Waterer with the charitable aims to preserve and conserve historic leather, skin, and related materials. So now the LCC takes a holistic approach. Thank you. A holistic approach to the preservation, looking not only to conserve historic objects, but also the skills, knowledge, and experience required to create them. So the organisation works within a broad network of heritage and industry specialists, many of whom are in this room, and also traditional practitioners and craftspeople globally. So we have three loose branches. We work across education, research, and practical conservation treatment to further engagement with historic and modern skin-based materials, and also to ensure high-level approaches to treatment and preservation are widely available. Consideration of repair and conservation gives us quite a unique perspective on the material, and this enables us to engage with a wide span of society, exploring important issues and context of the material. Due to current widespread conversation about climate change and environmental issues, combined with the popularity of shows like The Repair Shop, conservation is becoming a kind of a part of the public zeitgeist, and interest and engagement in the topic is steadily growing. Within the museum industry as well, conservation is becoming a more visible discipline. There you go. I forgot to do that, sorry. So the Leather Conservation Centre is, as an organisation, unique in its focus and output. And as well as contributing to the physical preservation of objects, it also plays an important role in preserving vital, intangible, industrial and craft heritage. So some background on the field in general. Conservation as we know it is still relatively young as an industry, if you call it an industry. Many within the field pinpoint the birth date of the modern discipline to the Florence floods in 1966, where a huge rescue project was necessary to save massive amounts of important historic objects from destruction by floods. And a considered interdisciplinary approach integrating chemistry, art history, and ethics was implemented. Similarly to many professional disciplines, conservation is underpinned by a code of ethics, and we have various national and international governing bodies that exist to encourage transparency and development in the sector. These are built upon concepts introduced in 1931 via the Athens Charter. So the Athens Charter for the Restoration of Historic Monuments is a 7-point manifesto adopted at the First International Congress of Architects and Technicians of Historic Monuments in Athens in 1931. This charter introduced important conservation concepts and principles, such as the idea of a common world heritage, the importance of the setting of materials, and the principle of integration of new materials into original material. So current thought and approach within conservation is sometimes referred to as values-based conservation. And this is concerned with preserving the values of heritage, both tangible and intangible. There are a number of national and international bodies setting standards and providing professional accreditation for those working in the field, including ICON in the UK, the American Institute for Conservation, the Canadian Conservation Institute, the International Council of Museums, Conservation Committee, etc., etc. It goes on. So within the context of conservation, which already is quite a niche field, leather and related materials is extremely niche. It's a relatively small specialism, despite the fact that the category itself is extremely broad. And within that, there spans a range of materials. There are a few dedicated organisations working within the area, and also funding opportunities are limited. Much of the foundational research and conservation techniques have historically come from the leather industry, or more recently been produced by organisations working in related material or object categories. Therefore, there's a huge disparity in research focus across the field, with readily available research and literature tending to concentrate on specific areas such as vegetable tan leathers, including archaeological examples, archive materials such as bookbinding leathers or parchment, and fine gilt leather wall hanging, somewhat bizarrely. Other materials within the leather and related materials category still suffer from a fundamental lack of investigation, which presents a precarious situation for large amounts of historic material. At particular risk are those materials produced by non-industrialised societies, or those we might consider more modern. So we're going to focus today on the more modern materials, as we're quickly reaching a critical point in the preservation of our recent leather heritage, as large amounts of 20th and 21st century objects in museum collections are currently suffering catastrophic deterioration or damage, without the foundational information available to conservators to treat these issues safely and to ensure long-term preservation of these materials. Within this category, we're including all mineral tanned leathers, or modern, so not alum tawed, but alum tanning, and this also includes chrome. All synthetic tannages, all kind of combined tannages, combined approaches, and also leathers with heavy or pigmented surface finishes. So that gives an idea of the scale of this issue. So these materials can be found in all areas of modern human life, from fashion to vehicles, from utilitarian objects to contemporary art pieces. Each of these materials exhibits individual deterioration patterns and symptoms. Also present are widespread issues with acid hydrolysis, which is well understood by conservators in the context of red-rotted vegetable tan leathers, but in many of these new materials is yet to be categorized and described. Patterns of deterioration in vegetable tan leathers are well known, and conservators know what they can expect, how to monitor, and also available options for treatment. However, deterioration in chrome or synthetic tannages is rarely discussed within our field, and conservators working with these objects are not prepared for damage when it does occur. One real-time aging experiment found that chrome tan leathers stored for 36 years in an urban library lost an average of 70% of its tensile strength during that time. So there's a huge wave of unstable material heading to conservation benches globally. And in order to preserve the legacy of this heritage, we think that partnership, collaboration, and interdisciplinary cooperation are necessary at this point in order to build the capacity needed to meet this challenge. So Arianne is now going to just go through a case study which will explore a project we've recently done, which is representative of these issues. It will show the prevalence within collections of these types of materials and a few examples, really a minute number of examples compared to the scale of the issue with what we're working with.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So we are following in the footsteps of Fatima's presentation earlier, also looking at shoes of a somewhat different construction. So this project included 18 shoes from Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, part of West Northants Council. The project, as Rosie said, is representative of many museum collections today that have items spanning across different time periods, where many of the more modern objects are now more unstable than those and deteriorated than those historic ones. So the LCC was contacted in 2018 to assess and stabilize this group of shoes, so they would go on to permanent exhibition for up to 10 years. Of the 18 shoes that were in this collection, half of them were manufactured in the 20th and 21st century, and over half of those showed notable signs of degradation associated with modern leathers and plastic surface finishes. So I will show you some examples from the project, here being one, which illustrate the types of issues we're facing on a rapidly increasing basis. And as Rosie said, there's currently very little underlying conservation research to inform our approaches to treatment. It's also important to note for us that we are only referring to damage that is caused by inherent vice of the material and not damage that is caused by use of the object during its life, which is often informs our understanding of objects and is approached from a different ethical perspective within conservation. So here, first example is from 1978. It's called the Naked Lady shoe for obvious reasons. It's a black patent leather stiletto and was adapted from an earlier design that was commissioned by the Crafts Council of England. So there is more than one of these shoes. If we move on, this one? Yes. So here it is in its packaging on the left, and we can see immediately the yellowing of the acid-free tissue within the center of the shoe. This indicates to us that there is off-gassing of VOCs, which are causing from the plastic degradation, which is causing this discoloration. Within the confined space of the storage box, this poses issues to the associated materials on the shoe. So we have the rubber heel cap and the metal fixing components, which will be negatively impacted by these VOCs. In a display context, particularly if contained within an airtight space, such as a showcase, these acidic degradation products pose a further risk to objects and materials in the vicinity. On the right, we have the leaching plasticizers, which cause the patent leather to become tacky, causing dust and airborne particulates to stick to the surface. This poses an issue aesthetically, particularly on a black patent leather, where the intention of the designer and likely the reason behind choosing this material was to create something that is slick, bold, and of high gloss. And obviously the accumulation of dust on the surface distracts from this intended aesthetic. Surface dust in larger amounts can also have hygroscopic properties, drawing in moisture towards the surface and thus perpetrating further degradation. Something like this may not seem like an overly substantial issue, and this image doesn't show a particularly large amount of dust on the surface, but there are very few treatment options available to prevent the situation worsening, and the impact of the leaching plasticizers on the leather substrate is as yet unknown. Some patent leathers have been cleaned successfully with aqueous-based systems, but this comes with the risk of pulling out more plasticizers and potentially causing blanching. And an alternative to this would be cleaning mechanically using tweezers. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this is very time-consuming and doesn't address the issue of the tacky surface. The current conservation approaches to stabilizing leaching plasticizers focus on tightly controlled, low temperature and anoxic storage, which is again a far from practical, let alone expensive approach if we want to display and enjoy these heritage items. The second example. So we've got some red patent leather fetish ballet shoes from the same collection. Here you can see some significant blooming confined to one area at the top part of the heels of both shoes. due to the location of the blooming, it was thought to be a result of the former material underneath, which was likely rubber. This is also called slight pitting of the leather. So here you can see the issue slightly closer. Similarly to the bloom in the previous shoe, there is currently no long-term approach to stabilizing this degradation, except from placing the shoes in tightly controlled storage. In the instance of these shoes, the blooming was reduced from the surface using solvents, but with the understanding that it would likely return in the future. This type of issue, so the degradation from one material acting as a catalyst to promote degradation of an associated material, manifests itself in many ways with modern materials, including leather with heavy surface finishes. And an issue for us is that the scale of the problem is extremely difficult to quantify, as there is currently such a gap in the knowledge and research. And one last example here. So we've got the aptly called wheel heels. These were designed in the mid-1960s. They may appear as the most impractical yet, but apparently the wheel had a braking mechanism whenever the wearer applied pressure, so it would prevent you slipping. So here we have a close-up of the surface degradation. We can see cracking throughout the surface coating. This phenomena is extremely common, particularly with coated leathers and items such as shoes that have served somewhat of a utilitarian function, and stress is applied during use, which can be evidenced here if we look at the orientation of the cracking. A similar crackling effect is created by the migration of components in the surface finish, which cause physical shrinkage of the surface and subsequent cracking. Over time, this cracking is likely to worsen, which will allow moisture and other atmospheric agents of deterioration to penetrate, react with the leather, and perpetrate further degradation. Again, at present, the only real approach to stabilizing this type of damage is through preventive means. So storage, display in a very controlled environment, and using internal mounts to limit the amount of movement in response to environmental fluctuations. So the conservation work on this collection was carried out in 2018. And to date, there has been very little advancement in our approaches to treatment of these types of materials. Fortunately for this collection, it was returning to a museum environment with stable, controlled environmental parameters, which will help reduce the rate of many of these types of degradation mechanisms. This is, as you can imagine, not always the case, particularly when we're working with things such as cars and furniture that will go back into regular use. One of the main issues that we are facing is the sheer volume of modern materials present and accessible methods of identifying them. In terms of conservation, this diversity poses a big challenge. There was an unfortunate tendency in the past, as Rosie was saying, is to treat most types of leather according to the principles intended for vegetable tan leather. And this is a direct result of the selective focus and knowledge and research within our field that Rosie mentioned. One of the key points that we try to emphasize during talks and our training is the importance of understanding the specific type of material or leather you have in front of you and the specific of its deterioration mechanisms. Fortunately for us, our library contains a wealth of information in industry texts, journals, and patents, most of which have been kindly donated to the Centre by professionals from within the leather industry. We also have built strong working relationships with many experts in the field, some of whom are here today, so we have access to the knowledge needed to advise on appropriate methods of care, but only where this information exists. There is much work that needs to be done to ready ourselves for the mass of 20th and 21st century materials that increasingly demand our care, and a continued collaboration and support from other leather-related fields is vital to do this.
Okay. So next steps on this. So in order to try and get ahead of the issue somewhat, the Leather Conservation Centre intends to facilitate a large, multifaceted research project to look at various aspects of the preservation of our modern leather heritage. We hope that you, as leather technicians and chemists and related backgrounds, will be interested in engaging with this project, and we would welcome the expertise that this community can bring. It's particularly poignant for us that this project to preserve the legacy of modern leather is being launched at this point, where the structure of leather education in this country is in flux, and I think Matthew spoke for us all earlier on that. So the first stage of this project is going to be a knowledge transfer project run in collaboration with De Montfort University, which will focus specifically on heavy surface finishes on leather materials and exploring more the interaction between the leather substrate and the surface finish as they age. Alongside this, we will also be working to contextualize the materials by recording production methods and making a toolkit of identification techniques in order to make this crucial information available to conservators and other heritage specialists. This will then lay the foundations from which we can categorize deterioration across this range of materials, and then we can begin to pinpoint approaches to preservation on an industry-wide scale. During the course of this research, we will also continue educating heritage professionals, craftspeople, and members of the public on the fundamental character of skin materials, including differences in production, characteristics, storage, treatment approaches, in order to try to continue to break down the one-size-fits-all approach, which is commonly seen in many parts of society, which can be extremely damaging to these types of materials. This is a huge task, so we're working on initiating new fundraising approaches to secure additional finance to help us achieve these goals, as well as collaboration and advice from within the leather industry, particularly those who are personally involved in production. We are all acutely aware of the challenges that the industry is currently facing. But on the other hand, these challenges, combined with added pressures of global climate crisis and ecological collapse, present huge opportunity to reevaluate the meaning, significance, and impact of this hugely important material. And we are looking forward to building on this and working towards a future where the cohesion and community between all of our fields allows for the preservation of leather and its legacy as it's actually been created. So on a final note, as an update, we are due to move into a new studio early next year, and we would love if you would come and visit us and yeah, come and say hi when we